hand. Gotta love the horny too.
One of my favorite lures of all time is a frog. There's literally nothing like it, like skipping a frog up underneath of a dock or an overhanging tree, seeing that bass come up there and crush that thing, setting the hook with braided line and pulling them out of the cover. There's just nothing quite like it. But what I have found is that there are times when a bait like a toad, a plastic toad like this, actually can outproduce the frog. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com. Guys, spring is just around the corner, and spring is one of the best times of the year to be out fishing. So stocking up right now, getting prepared for that springtime is a great idea. And I'm actually gonna list some of my favorite frogs and toads down below in the description. If you guys wanna pick up some tackle, click those links down below in the description, and you're greatly gonna help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel. Like I said, guys, the frog is one of my favorite lures of all time. It's probably one of yours, but there are times where a toad is going to outproduce the frog. And actually, where I first really saw this was actually on the lake that I'm fishing right now. I'm down here in Florida. I'm on the Butler chain of lakes. I actually kind of came back to the scene of really where I first saw the power of the toad to try to recreate it. But what I found is there's literally just like no fish in this area. But what happened was, well, what had happened was one day I was out here, I was fishing a lot of these lily pads, and I was fishing it with a frog, and I had caught several fish, but there were a lot of smaller fish, a lot of those 1 pound to 2 pound fish. And I knew that those were basically the males that were coming into these areas. It was during kind of the spawn of the year. And for whatever reason, I decided to pick up a toad. And literally within about 5 casts, I had a 7-pounder blow up on this thing. It actually didn't get the bait. It blew up on this thing and it missed the bait. But that was by far the biggest bass that I had even seen that day. And I really didn't think anything of it at the time. I actually picked the frog back up and I started catching a couple more of those 1.5 to 2 pound fish. But then again, I picked up the toad, I threw it out there amongst the paths, and within about 10 minutes, I caught a 4-pounder on the toad. And although I didn't notice it the first time, the second time I kind of figured out what had happened. And the thing was, I had been fishing the frog around female bass that were up in these pads, but those bass were obviously a little bit smarter. And the thing was, is that they were getting too good of a look at the frog, and therefore they were not hitting the bait. But with a toad, this thing just came whizzing past them. And when that happens, it actually created a reaction strike. A lot of times in bass fishing, we're gonna call this a fight or flight type mentality. Sometimes if something goes whizzing past the bass, they literally have to decide in a split second, am I gonna eat this thing right now or am I gonna leave it alone? With the frog, they have time to kind of decide, do I want to eat that thing or not? But with the toad, it's a split second decision. And there are times where big bass will actually hit that toad when they won't hit the frog. Again, it causes a reaction strike. I've actually kind of seen this same thing happen before towards the end of summer. You know, towards the end of summer, we get into a time where the bass have really seen a lot of lures. Whether you fish ponds, lakes, rivers, they have seen it all. They've seen every single lure you got. So when you get into those situations, sometimes fishing that faster lure, something that whizzes past their head very quickly, like I said, it just makes them decide right then and there, do I want to bite this thing or do I not? And sometimes they decide, let's just go up there and grab it. And that can mean a huge difference in not only getting bites, but also catching quality fish. Now, this same concept actually doesn't just apply to frogs and toads. It really applies to any type of fishing. Sometimes when you're flipping and pitching around vegetation or docks or wood, whatever it may be, sometimes using a heavier weight, something that falls really quick past that bass's face, it really makes them decide very quickly, and sometimes they're going to react and they're just going to grab that bait. A huge situation that you also see this happen is when you are fishing in clear water. A lot of times in clear water, you have to make those fish react. If you don't have the wind or you don't have some cloud cover, if you're fishing very still conditions, you don't want that bass to get too good of a look at your bait, because they're going to be able to tell that's not real. You know, so sometimes if I'm fishing, for instance, a jerkbait, I'm gonna work it a lot faster in clear water situations in order to catch more bass that just are reacting to the movement that they're seeing and not really honing in on that bait. And the same thing applies to frogs and toads. So again, if I'm fishing really clear water, what I like to do often is fish a toad instead of the frog. Now, another time where it's really best to fish a toad versus a frog is really when you're just trying to locate bass. You know, you can fish a toad extremely fast. We've been talking about that. But for instance, if you look kind of behind me, you kind of see a pad field back there. And sometimes fishing a toad in that pad field is really going to allow you to hit on a lot of targets really quickly. And that way you can focus on finding the groups of bass that are in that shallow cover. If you're using a bait like a frog, it's going to take you a lot longer to kind of pick around this area and see if the bass are relating to grass, if they're relating to cattails, if they're relating to pads. But with that toad, all you're really trying to do is get one bite. This is something that I do all the time, and it really doesn't have anything to do with just vegetation. You can do this same thing around wood cover or even rock banks, and that is fish something fast like a toad through that area. And what I'm looking for is one bite. If I can just get one bite, then I might slow down and actually fish something like a frog behind them. But really the best way to cover a lot of water is really with that toad. Most of the time in bass fishing, there's not always secrets. It's really about just covering water. It's really about just trying to fish as much water as possible until you find that group of fish. You think that a lot of times guys like, you know, Jacob Wheeler and Brian Thrifts, they just have something magical about them where they're always locating fish. But the truth is that they are very effective at covering water. If they can cover 30% more water than another pro fisherman, they can probably cover 200% more water than the average guy. They're simply going to see more areas, fish more areas, and just locate those groups of fish. A lot of times, that's what bass fishing is all about. It's not some magical secret, it's just about covering water. And to cover water very effectively, you can do it with a toad. Now, like I just talked about, one of my favorite areas to actually fish a toad over the frog is when I'm fishing around pad fields. Now, with that being said, I actually did a video all about fishing pads and how I think about 90% of bass actually don't live in most of the pads, but they do live in these pads right here. So if you want to click on that video next and watch that, you're going to hear me talk a little bit more about the toad. Also, don't forget to pick up your favorite bait down below in the link in the description. Comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.